The Nexus Prime Coliseum had witnessed countless spectacles across its 7,000-year history, but even by galactic standards, this year's championship registration was approaching legendary levels of bureaucratic chaos. Officials scurried between 17 different translation matrices while attempting to verify combat credentials for beings whose anatomical structures defied conventional weapon classification systems. The Galactic Combat Championship represented the pinnacle of warrior achievement across 43 star systems. Every species with opposable thumbs, or their evolutionary equivalent, sent their finest specimens to compete in what historians would later describe as the most unnecessarily complicated sporting event in recorded civilization. The tournament's rulebook had grown to encompass 12 volumes, each thicker than most species' complete legal codes, covering everything from acceptable combat enhancement protocols to the proper ceremonial blessing of molecular disruptors. Registration Bay 7 buzzed with the typical pre-tournament theater. The Altarian champion arrived wearing ceremonial battle armor forged from compressed neutron star material, accompanied by a retinue of genetic consultants and 3 backup spinal columns. Their opponent assessment algorithms had been calculating optimal combat strategies for the past 6 months, cross-referencing fighting techniques with psychological warfare tactics, refined over millennia of interstellar conflict. 2 bays over, the Centauri delegation unloaded equipment that resembled a small manufacturing facility. Their representative had undergone 17 surgical modifications, including redundant nervous systems and supplemental organs designed specifically for combat applications. The warrior's blood had been replaced with synthetic compounds that could adapt to environmental hazards in real time, while subcutaneous armor plating provided protection against energy weapons that hadn't even been invented yet. The Regillian entry required a specialized transport just for their combat suit, a technological marvel that incorporated AI assistance, predictive movement software, and enough firepower to level a small city. Tournament officials had spent 3 days reviewing technical specifications just to ensure it met the championship's increasingly liberal definition of personal equipment. Meanwhile, the betting syndicates were having the time of their collective lives. Odds shifted constantly as new champions registered, with bookmakers frantically recalculating probability matrices every time another species unveiled their latest combat innovation. The vegan warrior's cybernetic enhancement package alone had caused a 17-point swing in the betting markets, while rumors about the Tau Ceti champion's classified military training had sent odds for several other competitors into freefall. Tournament director Nexthilon surveyed the controlled chaos with the weary expression of someone who had overseen 43 previous championships and was beginning to question his life choices. The administrative nightmare had reached new heights this cycle, with 3 separate diplomatic incidents already brewing over equipment classification disputes, and 1 formal complaint about unfair technological advantages that was being reviewed by a committee of specialists in 17 different fields of expertise. The arrival announcement system, struggling under the weight of simultaneously translating combat credentials into 43 languages, had developed what technicians diplomatically termed processing irregularity. This resulted in the rather embarrassing situation where the Proxima champion had been introduced as a nutritional supplement distributor, rather than a master of 7 deadly fighting disciplines. It was during this symphony of organized pandemonium that Registration Terminal 12 registered a new entry. The system dutifully logged the arrival, cross-referenced the combat credentials against the tournament database, and prepared the standard ceremonial announcement. What it found, however, caused several processors to experience what could only be described as electronic confusion. The credentials were legitimate, though suspiciously straightforward. No genetic modifications, no cybernetic enhancements, no advanced weaponry, no support team, no specialized equipment beyond what the system classified as basic textile coverings and standard footwear. The footwear entry was particularly puzzling. According to the scans, the competitor was wearing something the database identified as canvas and rubber recreational athletic shoes, a classification so primitive that the system initially flagged it as a potential data corruption error. The human walked through the registration checkpoint with the casual confidence of someone completely unaware that their mere presence was causing computational meltdowns across 3 different administrative networks. The tournament's sophisticated threat assessment protocols, designed to evaluate beings capable of splitting atoms with their bare hands, found themselves analyzing canvas sneakers with the bewildered intensity usually reserved for exotic matter physics. Director Nexthilon received the alert on his personal communicator and assumed it was another system malfunction. Humans were known throughout the galaxy for their peculiar habit of participating in events they were categorically unqualified for. But combat championships were typically beyond even their remarkable capacity for optimistic overreach. The betting syndicates, meanwhile, had noticed the anomaly and were experiencing something approaching collective hysteria. Bookmakers who had built careers on calculating odds for warriors capable of punching through starship hulls found themselves staring at probability calculations for someone whose most advanced piece of equipment appeared to be shoelaces. Security footage from registration showed the human completing paperwork with a ballpoint pen, an actual ink-dispensing writing implement that several species hadn't seen outside of museums. When asked about combat modifications, the human had simply shaken their head and pointed to their sneakers as if this constituted a reasonable explanation for their tournament preparation. The administrative chaos reached its crescendo when 3 different officials simultaneously arrived at Registration Terminal 12, each convinced they were dealing with either an elaborate practical joke or a severe system malfunction. What they found instead was a human standing patiently in line behind a Betelgeusian whose combat preparation had required evacuating 2 city blocks for safety reasons, wearing shoes that looked like they had been purchased at a discount retail establishment. The universe, it seemed, was about to discover whether canvas and rubber could compete against technologies that violated several fundamental laws of physics. The opening ceremonies began with the traditional ceremony of inevitable violence, featuring interpretive combat dances from each participating species. The humans' contribution to this ancient ritual consisted of what appeared to be casual stretching exercises, causing the ceremonial commentators to experience their first existential crisis of the tournament. How does one provide poetic commentary about someone touching their toes? Broadcast coordinator Flux Merlin had overseen 47 championship ceremonies, but nothing had prepared him for explaining hamstring stretches to an audience expecting ritualized displays of otherworldly combat prowess. His translation of the human's preparation as meditative preparation for battle transcendence was considered generous by Galactic journalism standards. The elimination rounds commenced with bracket placements determined by the traditional method of who looks most likely to accidentally destroy the facility. This sophisticated system placed the human dead last in threat assessment rankings, somewhere between a diplomatic intern and a concession stand vendor. The combat analysis computers, having spent considerable processing power calculating the destructive potential of canvas footwear, had essentially given up and assigned random numbers. First-round matchup pitted the human against Gorthak the Bone Crusher, a Regalian whose combat modifications included reinforced skeletal structure, enhanced musculature, and the rather impractical addition of retractable titanium spikes protruding from various joints. Gorthak had prepared for this tournament by defeating progressively larger opponents, culminating in single-handedly dismantling a decommissioned battlecruiser as a warm-up exercise. The combat arena's safety protocols engaged automatically when Gorthak entered, recognizing the potential for structural damage to the facility itself. Energy shields activated, medical teams positioned themselves strategically, and insurance adjusters began calculating probable reconstruction costs. When the human entered wearing the same sneakers from registration, the arena's threat detection systems briefly wondered if they were experiencing technical difficulties. What followed challenged every known principle of combat theory that had been developed across 7 millennia of interspecies warfare. Gorthak charged with the unstoppable momentum of a living siege engine, titanium spikes gleaming under arena lights, roaring a battle cry that registered on seismic monitoring equipment 3 systems away. The human stepped sideways. Galactic combat analysis had never encountered a defensive strategy quite so fundamentally simple. Gorthak's momentum, calculated to devastating perfection against opponents who would attempt to match force with force, carried him directly into the arena wall with sufficient impact to require immediate structural inspection. The human, meanwhile, had relocated approximately 3 feet to the left and was examining their fingernails with the casual interest of someone waiting for public transportation. The arena fell silent, except for the sound of Gorthak attempting to extract himself from a wall designed to withstand direct energy weapon bombardment. Commentators frantically consulted combat databases, searching for historical precedent for what they had just witnessed. The closest match involved a tactical retreat executed by the Andromedan Navy during the Siege of Proxima, but that had required 17 starships and a dimensional fold generator. Betting syndicates across the galaxy experienced what economists would later term aggressive market recalibration. The humans' odds shifted from laughably impossible to concerning anomaly in approximately 37 seconds, causing several automated trading systems to suspend operations rather than process transactions that violated their fundamental understanding of probability mathematics. Round 2 introduced additional complications to the tournament's carefully planned proceedings. The Centauri champion, having observed the previous match through tactical analysis subroutines, had adjusted their combat approach to account for primitive evasion strategy. This resulted in a fighting technique that resembled an elaborate dance performed by someone having a seizure while attempting to swat invisible insects. The humans' response to this display of advanced combat choreography was to wait patiently until their opponent exhausted themselves, then gently push them over. Tournament officials huddled in emergency session, reviewing footage with the desperate intensity of archaeologists attempting to decipher extinct languages. The humans' techniques defied classification in any known combat discipline, appearing to violate several basic principles of physics while somehow remaining entirely legal under tournament regulation. Director Nexthulan found himself in the unprecedented position of explaining to Galactic media representatives why the championship's most advanced combat analysis computers had begun displaying error messages in languages that hadn't been spoken for 1,000 years. The human advanced through preliminary rounds with the casual efficiency of someone folding laundry, leaving behind a trail of confused opponents and malfunctioning probability calculators. By round 4, the sneakers had become a galaxy-wide phenomenon, spawning academic debates about the relationship between technological advancement and practical effectiveness. The human remained blissfully unaware that their footwear had achieved legendary status among civilizations capable of casual interstellar travel. By the semifinals, the human had achieved something previously thought impossible in galactic sports, making the universe's most sophisticated civilizations question their fundamental approach to problem-solving. Emergency sessions convened across 17 star systems as military strategists attempted to decode combat techniques that appeared to consist entirely of standing in slightly different locations at opportune moments. The Andromedan Empire's War College had dispatched their finest tactical analysts to study arena footage, resulting in a classified report titled Theoretical Applications of Deliberate Spatial Displacement in Combat Scenarios. The document's conclusion, that the human was either a tactical genius operating on levels beyond galactic comprehension, or someone who had stumbled into the championship by accident, was deemed too disturbing for public release. Tournament security had escalated to unprecedented levels following what historians would later call the diplomatic shoe incident. The Altarian ambassador had formally requested permission to examine the human's footwear for hidden technology, convinced that canvas and rubber could not possibly account for the systematic dismantling of their champion's combat algorithms. The subsequent diplomatic crisis required intervention from 3 neutral species, and resulted in the first interstellar treaty specifically addressing athletic footwear inspection protocols. Semifinal opponent number 1 represented the pinnacle of vegan military engineering, a warrior whose modifications included redundant organs, enhanced reflexes capable of perceiving attacks at the subatomic level, and cognitive processing power that could calculate optimal combat responses faster than most species could think. Their pre-match analysis had consumed enough computational resources to briefly slow interstellar communications across 7 sectors. The vegan champion entered the arena, accompanied by a support team of 17 specialists, each monitoring different aspects of their warrior's biological and technological system. Holographic displays showed real-time analysis of muscle tension, neural activity and tactical probability calculations updating thousands of times per second. The warrior's combat suit incorporated AI assistance that could predict opponent movements based on microscopic changes in stance, breathing patterns, and electromagnetic field fluctuations. The human walked onto the arena floor and immediately sat down to retie one of their shoelaces. This unexpected development caused the vegan champion's prediction algorithms to experience what technicians later described as cascading analytical failure. The AI systems, designed to interpret aggressive combat maneuvers, found themselves attempting to process the tactical implications of shoelace maintenance. Warning indicators flashed across monitoring displays as combat computers struggled to calculate threat assessments for double-knotted cotton laces. The match began with the vegan champion executing a combat sequence that incorporated 17 different martial disciplines, advanced acrobatics, and weaponry that violated several fundamental laws of physics. The display was so impressive that arena spectators from 3 different species began composing epic poems about it in real time. The human finished tying their shoe, stood up, and walked away from the increasingly elaborate combat demonstration occurring behind them. The vegan champion, following predictive algorithms that assumed their opponent would engage in reciprocal combat complexity, continued their magnificent display until they eventually exhausted their enhanced metabolism and collapsed from overexertion. Victory by opponent exhaustion was technically legal under tournament regulations, though it had never been achieved through the strategic application of shoelace maintenance before. Galactic news networks abandoned their regular programming to provide continuous coverage of what media analysts were calling the Canvas Revolution. Academic institutions across 43 systems began offering emergency seminars on post-technology combat theory, while military academies quietly added courses on fundamental movement principles to their curricula. The second semifinal presented an even greater challenge. The Betelgeusian champion, whose species had evolved past the need for physical form and existed as pure energy beings capable of manipulating matter at the molecular level. Their combat approach involved restructuring local reality to create disadvantaged conditions for opponents, essentially winning matches by temporarily rewriting the laws of physics in their immediate vicinity. The humans' counter strategy involved walking in a circle. Betelgeusian energy manipulation required precise calculations of spatial relationships to alter molecular structures effectively. The human's circular movement pattern, executed at a pace that could charitably be described as leisurely stroll, created constantly shifting geometric relationships that overwhelmed the Betelgeusians' reality-altering algorithm. After 17 minutes of attempting to restructure matter around a target that kept moving in an entirely unpredictable pattern, the energy being dispersed itself across 7 dimensions in what amounted to a cosmic-scale migraine. Tournament officials faced the unprecedented situation of explaining to galactic media why advanced beings capable of casual reality manipulation had been defeated by walking in circles. The human advanced to the championship final against Nexus Prime's defending champion, a warrior whose combat record included victories against opponents that existed in theoretical physics textbooks. Political ramifications extended beyond mere sporting embarrassment. The Regillian Empire had begun quietly reassessing their military doctrine after their champion was defeated by someone stepping sideways. The Centauri Federation initiated emergency review of their combat enhancement programs, while the Andromedan Navy suspended all tactical training pending further analysis of primitive movement-based strategy systems. The human remained oblivious to their role in precipitating the galaxy's first existential crisis over footwear, continuing to wear the same canvas sneakers that had somehow become the most analyzed objects in recorded galactic history. The championship final had evolved beyond a mere sporting event into what political scientists were calling the most significant philosophical crisis in galactic history. 17 different species had declared national emergence. 3 empires had suspended their military operations pending strategic review, and the Galactic Stock Exchange had temporarily halted trading on all combat-related technologies after their values collapsed faster than a Regillian champion running into a wall. Nexus Prime's defending champion represented the absolute pinnacle of warrior evolution across known space. Desertification Omega-7 was not so much a being as a carefully orchestrated fusion of biological excellence, technological advancement, and what could only be described as weaponized mathematics. Their species had spent 12,000 years perfecting the art of combat, developing techniques that operated on 17 different dimensional planes simultaneously, while incorporating quantum probability manipulation and casual violation of several conservation. Omega-7's preparation for this match had required evacuating 3 star systems as a safety precaution. Their combat algorithms had been processing tactical scenarios for 6 months, analyzing every possible variable from atmospheric pressure to gravitational field fluctuation. The champion's enhancement suite included redundant nervous systems operating in parallel dimensions, predictive combat modeling that calculated outcomes 12 seconds into the future, and weaponry that could disintegrate opponents at the subatomic level. Tournament officials had installed additional safety measures that resembled the defensive systems typically reserved for containing supernovas. Energy barriers capable of withstanding stellar collapse surrounded the arena, while emergency evacuation protocols stood ready to relocate the entire facility to another dimension if necessary. Medical teams included specialists in temporal paradox treatment and reality reconstruction surgery. The human arrived 15 minutes late, having apparently stopped for coffee. This represented a development so fundamentally unprecedented that tournament computers briefly attempted to calculate the tactical implications of caffeine consumption before experiencing what technicians delicately termed existential processing errors. The human carried a paper cup containing what appeared to be ordinary beverage liquid, sipping it occasionally while examining the arena's elaborate safety preparations with the mild curiosity of someone visiting a museum. Galactic viewership had reached historic levels. Beings from 43 star systems watched with the desperate fascination usually reserved for impending natural disasters, while political leaders held emergency sessions to discuss the potential ramifications of their most advanced warrior being defeated by someone whose greatest technological achievement appeared to be successfully operating a beverage dispensing machine. The championship began with Omega-7 executing a combat sequence that incorporated techniques developed across millennia of interstellar warfare. The champion moved through 17-dimensional planes simultaneously, manipulating local space-time to create tactical advantages while unleashing attacks that operated on principles of physics that existed primarily in theoretical mathematics textbooks. The display was so magnificent that several observers experienced religious conversions, convinced they were witnessing the universe's fundamental combat algorithms made manifest. The human finished their coffee, crumpled the paper cup and looked around for somewhere to dispose of it properly. Omega-7's predictive combat modeling, designed to anticipate every possible opponent response within a 12-second temporal window, had not included waste disposal considerations in its tactical calculation. The champion's attacks continued to devastate the space where the human had been standing, creating spectacular displays of interdimensional combat artistry, while their opponent wandered around the arena's perimeter searching for recycling facilities. The cosmic irony was lost on no one except the human, who eventually located an appropriate waste receptacle and returned to the center of the arena just as Omega-7's 12-dimensional attack sequence reached its crescendo. The champion's final maneuver involved restructuring local reality to create an inescapable tactical situation, trapping opponents within a combat scenario where victory was mathematically impossible, according to 17 different branches of theoretical physics. The human walked through the interdimensional trap as if it were an unusually elaborate doorway. What followed challenged fundamental assumptions about the relationship between technological advancement and practical effectiveness. Omega-7's reality manipulation required precise calculations of spatial relationships and dimensional coordinates. The human's complete inability to perceive the elaborate interdimensional combat construct meant they moved through it without triggering any of the sophisticated detection and response protocols that made it theoretically inescapable. The defending champion found themselves in the unprecedented situation of having deployed the most advanced combat technique in galactic history against someone who was apparently immune to it through sheer ignorance of its existence. Omega-7's enhancement systems, designed to process combat scenarios across multiple dimensional planes simultaneously, began experiencing cascade failures as they attempted to calculate tactical responses to an opponent who existed only in baseline three-dimensional space. The match concluded when Omega-7's quantum consciousness became so tangled in multi-dimensional tactical calculations that they temporarily forgot which dimension contained the actual arena. The human, meanwhile, had begun examining their sneakers with the concerned expression of someone noticing a loose thread, completely oblivious to the metaphysical crisis occurring around them. Tournament officials faced the monumental task of explaining to galactic media how the most sophisticated warrior in recorded history had been defeated by someone whose primary concern during the championship final was beverage disposal etiquette. Director Nex Thulan's post-match interview consisted primarily of long pauses, punctuated by what linguists later classified as existential whimpering in 43 languages. The championship trophy presentation ceremony achieved legendary status for all the wrong reasons. The human accepted the award with the polite gratitude typically reserved for receiving correct change at retail establishments, while Omega-7 continued to exist in a state of multi-dimensional confusion that required intervention from 7 different branches of theoretical physics. Galactic civilization's response to the championship results varied from species to species. The Regillian Empire immediately disbanded their combat enhancement programs and began teaching basic movement techniques in military academy. The Centauri Federation launched a comprehensive study of pre-technology combat applications, while the Andromedan Navy quietly began recruiting personnel based on their ability to walk in straight lines rather than their capacity for interdimensional war. The human departed Nexus Prime the following morning, still wearing the same canvas sneakers that had inadvertently revolutionized galactic military theory. The championship trophy accompanied them, along with what historians would later recognize as the galaxy's most expensive and unintentional lesson in the relationship between complexity and effectiveness. Years later, as military academies across 43 star systems taught courses on fundamental movement principles and strategic beverage management, philosophers would debate whether the human's victory represented profound wisdom or spectacular accident. The sneakers themselves had been donated to the Galactic Museum of Inexplicable Phenomena, where they remained the most visited exhibit in the institution's 7,000-year history. The universe had learned through the most expensive educational experience in recorded history that sometimes the most sophisticated solution to any problem is remembering that problems usually have much simpler solutions than the ones involving interdimensional mathematics and quantum consciousness manipulation. Though whether this lesson was worth the complete restructuring of galactic military doctrine remained a subject of considerable debate among beings who had invested heavily in combat enhancement technology stock. The human, meanwhile, had returned to Earth and was presumably wearing different sneakers.